Here's another interesting little echo. I had this conversation with my son, and he said I would never want to have a handicapped child. I would, that's the one time I would abort a child. And I said, well, you don't know what gifts you might get from raising a handicapped child, and on a more spiritual level, this takes on a different meaning. And what they're saying here is just my bloody echo from a few days ago. And what it brings up in me as well is the experience of Natalie Sudman, who had that accident in Iraq, and she said she was hovering over her mangled body, and in that instant they were deciding on the other side, well, what sort of an injury shall we give you, to cope with in the times to come. And they were laughing and joking about it, and she'd see the outcomes if this was going to be damaged and that was going to be damaged, and it seems absolutely cruel and awful to us here. But it is interesting that this is an echo also of Natalie Sudman. I'll just play this because this is so profound for me. I mean, this is just a little echo for myself, because I had this conversation a few days ago with my son, who was absolutely adamant that that's all crap.
That's how everything in the universe works. So when we back off and we look at it like that, a death, a political uprising, an earthquake, 1 million people die, a plague, whatever you got, it's just to turn on the kaleidoscope. And the soul is not attached to the form that life takes on earth, because it recognizes that it's all about the turning of the kaleidoscope. And this is useful teaching when helping people work through trauma, where they're so attached to the bad thing that happened to them. And that's when it gets into forgiveness. Forgiveness really just means the releasing of attachment to the experience, the releasing of obsession with the experience. It has nothing to do with the other person, the perpetrator.
Incredible. And you talk about Hitler and all the people who died at the hands of Hitler. Is there a word for those types, those people, or are they just part of the puzzle? How's that work? I mean,
Danny calls them unconditional volunteers.
That's what I wondered. Yeah, I have that here as one of the questions. I love that. Explain that a little bit.
Well, first of all, we're all volunteering to sponsor the growth of each other. On a soul level, just using Danny for an example. Here comes this kid with this terrible disease, he was in diapers at 16. Why would somebody choose a body like that? And in his case, it was because we were buddies up there in the inner life, sitting around the planning table. And apparently I said, well, I want to be a spiritual teacher in my next incarnation. And he said, okay, I can help you with that. And we slap 5 and to earth we go. I think we all do that for each other. And sometimes we come just to do that. We come to earth. And I think where you've got millions of people who die under a political regime, as a group, they have volunteered for that experience to support the growth of the collective. Because those souls are so advanced that they recognize that it is a collective. Now, once we make this decision while we're planning our incarnations, it's no big deal to say, I'm going to come to Earth and I'm going to, be in a concentration camp. Once you get to Earth and you're there, of course you forget the view you had when you were not in a body, and it's the worst horrible thing you can imagine. We forget. There is that, disconnect that happens. If we remembered life between incarnations, we'd never want to incarnate. We'd never want to be here. We'd want to go back all the time.
What do you say to to those people who try to argue this point? Well, there's no way I would ever choose that. I mean, obviously, how do you answer those people? There's no way I would ever do that to myself.
There's no way your ego would ever choose that. Yeah. There's no way your body, Jane Doe, living in New Jersey, would ever choose that. But the soul of Jane Doe is not the same as the personality. The soul has a whole different list of requirements, if you will. Do you remember in the 70s, The Boy in the Bubble?
Yeah.
I saw a news story about him in 1973 3. And he was this kid who had to live in an isolation room because he had an immune disease. And I asked myself, even then, 40 years ago, why would somebody be in that body? And that was when I started to really channel, because I instantly got the answer, which is, oh, well, he volunteered so that you could be sitting here watching him on TV right now and ask this question and get this information and be talking about it with Bob Olson 40 years later.
Yeah.
It's all connected. It's all the kaleidoscope. Why did that kid come into Earth in that body? Somehow, on some level, he chose it.
Yeah.
Isn't it a really brilliant thought? And I hope he doesn't mind me putting this on. But I, because I'm grieving myself, you see, I feel drawn to these, and they kind of plop into my lap. Because I mean, this was an older one. I just randomly clicked on one of the suggestions on my sidebar, and it is kind of weird and wonderful how I seem to be getting either echoes or exactly what I need to hear, and I feel so guided in that way. I hope you do too. Anyway, this is the last share, I hope, from this.
We were talking about was lost potential. I want to take this to the biggest question that I could possibly ask of you. People were asking me this over the summer, promoting my book, and I always thought, you can't answer this in a radio interview, right? Same thing here, but you do such a beautiful job in the book, so I'm going to ask you, how do you answer this question, why does God allow bad things to happen? Your answer seems to begin with a definition of God, so, if you want to start there, fine. However you want to answer it.
Yeah, so I have in the book, the question, why would God let this happen? And my answer is, it depends what you think God is. This is very interesting because I'm studying this in school right now. I'm actually in school working on a master's in pastoral care, but we form our image of God as children. And it's usually based on, this is the Freudian view, the father, the protective father who provides and punishes. And that's one theory that's where we get our image of God in the Judeo-Christian world. So that's what people think God is, a protective father or mother that rewards you when you're good and punishes you when you're bad. This is what people are taught in Sunday school. By the time you're 5 or 6 or 7 years old, this is what you believe. So now you're 37 and some terrible thing happens, like your child dies, and all you have to refer to is that Sunday school image of God. You're still thinking like a 7-year-old. And I see so many bereaved parents who are like that. I have one client who thinks that, her child had cancer and he died, and she thinks God is punishing her because many, many years ago when she was in college, she had an abortion. Oh. And so to pay back for that life, God took the other life. Yeah. And that's the way a 7-year-old would think in Sunday school. So she never developed her theology beyond that. And most people don't. We're stuck in Sunday school theology because that's what our parents gave us. That's what the culture gave us. By the time you're 7, it's all set in stone. And no one thinks about it anymore until something bad happens. And then you ask that question. Well, why would the protective Father God let this terrible thing happen to me, to you, to anybody? And you can't answer that question if you see it as a protective Father God. Yep. You have to change the way you see God. And if you allow that change to happen, your pain will be relieved and your understanding will expand.
I mean, that's the biggest question, I think, in the work that I do, biggest question in the work that you do. I mean, if people can understand that, they can get to that place where they understand that. Everything else sort of falls into place. I mean, if you get that, and it changes your life because when bad things happen to you, you're no longer feeling like a victim. You're no longer feeling like you're being punished or ignored by God. You're recognizing that this is part of life. And can I find this? Oh, all right, I'm going to read again. You mind?
I love this. I'm very flattered. Thank you.
All right, page 95 and 96. Here we go. I read this to my wife this morning. So it starts off, you're talking about if you lose your job, you grieve, you worry, you have fear, and that's okay. The guides would never tell you to judge yourself for being fearful, but they would tell you to be with the fear, to breathe into it, allow it, process it, learn from it, feel it, and then walk through it to the new reality that awaits you. You talk about surrendering, which is really what that is all about. And you answer the question, how do you surrender? You stop projecting, stop broadcasting fear, stop everything, stop trying to survive, stop working so hard, just stop. And then broadcast one sentence, one word, one thought of surrender, and it will shift everything. Don't ask to be rescued. Don't ask God to fix it for you. Ask only to see the truth and lesson in the situation. And here's the real trick. You say it with gratitude, with love, not with fear, cynicism, or anger. You say, I surrender with love. I surrender with trust. I put myself into the arms of the angels, and I will stop and just be exactly where I am.